of elderly parents forced into loneliness, their savings siphoned away by the same children they'd raised. A 74-year-old woman evicted by her son after he forged her signature on a mortgage. An 81-year-old man left to die in a retirement home while his daughter vacationed in Tuscany with his money. Each story tightened something in my chest. Antenne. One night, while scrolling through another headline, elderly father sues children over neglect. Loses case. Something clicked. It wasn't enough to rage about it. The system was broken because it wasn't built to protect them. But I could build something new, something sharp. Something that would terrify the ungrateful into decency. That's when the idea of the Evelyn Foundation was born. It began in a tiny office in Manhattan, a rented floor above a dusty bookstore on East 84th. The sign on the door read only EF Legal Trust. I hired 2 lawyers, young, ambitious, and slightly disgusted with corporate law. One of them, Megan Chu, was 29, a Harvard grad with a spine of steel and an obsession with justice. The other, Victor Lane, was a divorce lawyer who'd grown sick of watching families cannibalize each other over wills. You want to fund lawsuits for old people? Megan had asked on her first day, half incredulous. Not old people. I corrected her. Abandoned parents. There's a difference. Victor leaned back in his chair, smirking. And what's the goal? Vengeance? No, I said. Accountability. I want the children too. Understand that neglect is theft, not just of money, but of time, of dignity, of love. They exchanged a glance. I could tell they thought I was another eccentric millionaire, trying to make noise before I died. Maybe I was. But once the first case landed on their desks, everything changed. Her name was Margaret Frost, 83 years old, a retired schoolteacher from Ohio. Her son had taken control of her finances after her husband passed, promising to handle the bills within 2 years. Her house was foreclosed, her car sold, and she was living in a nursing facility that reeked of bleach and loneliness. She wanted justice. We gave it to her. The trial was small, local, a probate court in Cleveland, but it was brutal. Megan Toronto. The defense with surgical precision, exposing every fraudulent transaction, every lie. Victor, for once, didn't smirk. He looked moved. The verdict came after 5 weeks. The son was ordered to repay $240,000 and issue a formal apology. It made national headlines. The foundation that fights for forgotten parents. Suddenly, we weren't just a strange legal charity. We were a movement. Donations flooded in. Retired judges, social workers, and even celebrities reached out. By year's end, we had offices in 3 states and more than 100 active cases. But with attention came enemies. Claire called me for the first time in 2 years. Dan, what the hell are you doing? I saw you on CNN. You're suing families. I'm helping parents who've been abandoned. I replied coolly. Something you might. They thought I died a broke old fool. That was the story everyone told at my funeral, the man who gambled away his wealth, who lived lavishly and left nothing but unpaid debts and a mountain of pity behind. Even my children, God bless their blind hearts, stood by my coffin in borrowed suits, whispering apologies to the creditors lined up in black like vultures. They believed the empire was gone, that their father's name had crumbled into ash. But beneath that pretense, beneath layers of orchestrated ruin, I had hidden $30 million where no one would ever think to look, where it would never touch their hands, but would instead build a different life for the ones who truly mattered, my other family. The one no one knew existed. It began 23 years ago, in a storm that wouldn't stop. The rain fell like the sky itself was splitting apart, and the wipers on my old Mercedes barely kept pace. I was driving away from a board meeting where my own brother had voted to oust me from the company I built, our family's company. My name was Richard Holley, and that night I wasn't just a man betrayed. I was a man reborn in the quiet rage of clarity. I'd spent decades building a legacy, only to realize that the legacy itself was the cage. The company, the family name, the estates had all belonged to an image, not to me. And when I pulled over at the edge of that highway, staring into the blur of rain and taillights, I made a silent vow. No one would ever control me again. Not the board, not the bloodline. Not even my wife. I met her 3 months later, Eva. She was not meant to be anything more than a distraction. She worked at a little cafe near the docks, all laughter and restless eyes. She didn't know who I was, not really. To her, I was Richard Collins, a quiet man who ran logistics for a shipping firm. I told her half-truths and small lies, but with every visit, those lies became the life I wanted. She had a son, Daniel, just for at the time, whose father had disappeared before he could remember his name. It was Daniel who first made me laugh again. Chasing seagulls on the pier, while Eva scolded him, and I bought another round of coffee just to stay a little longer. I told myself it was temporary, that I'd move on when the guilt crept in, but I never did. At home, my real family grew colder. Margaret, my wife, treated our marriage like a business merger measured. Cordial, dead. Our children, Alex and Carolyn, were already poisoned by the scent of inheritance. Alex demanded promotions in the firm I no longer controlled. Carolyn pretended to care, but her eyes were always on the trust funds. When I stopped attending family dinners, no one noticed. When I stopped answering their calls, they assumed I was busy scheming to regain control. They were half right. I was scheming, but not for them. Over the next expression said it all. She'd made up her mind. The case of Morris became our most publicized trial yet. Helen's son, Andrew, was a tech entrepreneur with millions in assets and an army of lawyers. He painted himself as a devoted son trying to manage his mother's declining faculties. His PR team flooded the press with photos of them smiling together from years past. A loving son betrayed by greed, one headline said, about me. During the trial, I sat in the front row, watching Helen testify. Her voice was sharp as glass. He told me it was for my safety, she said. He told Mummy I couldn't handle the bills, that the world was too fast for me. I believed him. I signed everything. I didn't know I was signing away my home, my freedom, my dignity. Andrew's lawyer stood. Monsieur? Morris, isn't it true that your son has provided for all your medical expenses? That you live in a state-of-the-art care facility? Helen's lips curled. A gilded cage is still a cage. Counselor, the courtroom went silent. In the end, we won. A $4.7 million judgment in Helen's favor, the largest in the Foundation's history. Cameras flashed. Journalists swarmed. Helen shook my hand outside the courthouse, her eyes cold and glinting. You did good work, Mr. Reed, she said. But don't make the mistake of thinking it's over. That night, Megan found me in the office, staring out at the rain-streaked skyline. You were right, she said quietly. She didn't want justice. She wanted to destroy him, I said. She succeeded. The next morning, the news broke. Andrew Morris had been found dead in his garage, carbon monoxide poisoning. No note. The Foundation was thrust into chaos. The tabloids howled. Foundation, son kills himself after lawsuit. Donations plummeted overnight. Politicians called for investigations. Victor stormed into my office, waving a newspaper. We need to shut down operations. At least temporarily. This could ruin everything. I didn't answer immediately. I was staring at a letter on my desk. No return address. Just a neatly typed note on thick paper. You built this, Daniel. You told us to fight. Some of us just fight harder. HMI folded the letter, slipped it into my pocket, and looked up at Victor. No, I said. We don't shut down. We expand. He blinked. Expand? After this. This, I said, tapping the newspaper, is proof we've hit a nerve. We've made them afraid. Now it's time to make them accountable. For the first time, Victor didn't smirk. He looked at me the way people look at someone standing too close to the edge of a cliff. You're not building a foundation anymore. Done, he whispered. You're building a crusade. He was right. But it was too late to stop. In the following months, we restructured. Megan became the public face, doing interviews. Talking Abu Dignity Frogger into the background, the ghost architect. Pulling strings. We launched Project Guardian, a nationwide initiative to give pro bono representation to any elderly person claiming neglect or exploitation. But something shifted in the tone of our cases. More parents were coming forward, not with financial grievances, but emotional ones, wanting to sue for abandonment. For being unloved, and though our lawyers turned most of them away. A few slipped through. One case in particular haunts me still. Lydia and Paul Kingston v. Kingston Family Trust. The Kingstons were 80 and 78. Suing their 3 adult children for intentional emotional deprivation. The media tore them apart, calling it the lawsuit that redefined parental revenge, and when the court surprisingly ruled in their favor, the floodgates opened. It was then that I began to see what I had unleashed, a cultural reckoning that no one could contain. Families fractured overnight. Children stopped visiting their parents for fear of being sued. Thanksgiving tables went empty. And for every victory, I felt my mother's absence like a deeper wound. One night, Megan came to my apartment. No cameras, no staff, just her, holding a file. Her eyes were tired. "You need to read this," she said. It was an internal memo, leaked correspondence from a law firm representing a group of adult children preparing to launch a class action lawsuit against the foundation. Their claim: emotional abuse, reputational harm, and systematic intimidation. I looked at the names listed on the document. One of them stopped me cold. Claire Reed, my sister, was suing me. When I first saw her name on that list, I thought it was a typo. Claire Reed, my sister, my blood. The girl who used to braid dandelions into our mother's hair while I chased fireflies in the backyard. The one who stood beside me at our father's funeral, her hand trembling in mine. I thought no, I knew she'd hated me for years, but suing me, joining a public crusade against everything I'd built. That was a different kind of betrayal. The kind you don't recover from. Megan stood quietly across the room while I reread the page, my eyes snagging on the legal jargon. Defamation, psychological harm, coercive influence, emotional distress. Her voice was low, careful. "I didn't want you to hear it from the press. The filings go public next week. How long have you known?" I asked. 2 days, she said. "Victor found out first." "He didn't want to tell you until we had a strategy." I laughed a dry, humorless sound that scraped my throat. "A strategy? For what?" "My sister's trying to dismantle the foundation. She wants to watch me burn. Maybe she just wants you to stop," Megan said softly. Her words hung between us, heavy and sharp. I turned toward the window, watching the city pulse below, bright, chaotic, indifferent. "You don't stop something like this, Megan, not after what we've done. Not after the lives we've changed." She hesitated. "Then, or destroyed." That was the first time she'd said it out loud. Destroyed. When she left, I poured myself a glass of scotch and opened my mother's last letter, the one she'd written weeks before she died. The one Claire had hidden from me until I found it in the probate records. Her handwriting was shaky but elegant, every loop and curve familiar. Greater than. "Danny, if you're reading this, I suppose I'm gone. Don't be angry, Josta. She's not cruel. She's just afraid. Afraid of being alone, afraid of losing what little she understands. Remember that anger always starts as love that forgot how to speak." I read that line 3 times, then folded the paper and set it beside the glass. The whiskey burned like confession. The next morning, the foundation was in full damage control mode. News outlets had gotten wind of the class action filing. Foundation founder sued by sister in landmark case. Cable hosts tore me apart in neatly packaged outrage segments. Social media, a manipulator of the past. Victor barged into my office with a folder. "We need to settle. Quietly. Pay her off. Make it disappear before it grows teeth. Settle." I snapped. "She's accusing me of destroying families. If I settle, I prove her right. She is right. Eschodbuck is Vartling as both. Look at what's happening. Dawn, do you even see it anymore? Half of these people aren't victims there, using your foundation as a weapon. Fathers suing sons because they didn't call on Christmas. Mothers suing daughters for moving out of state. You've turned grief into litigation." I stared at him, my chest tightening. "You think I don't see it? You think I wanted it this way? Then stop it," he said. "Shut it down before it consumes you too." But shutting it down wasn't an option. There was too much at stake, millions in donations, thousands of active cases, people depending on us. On me, the foundation had become a living organism, pulsing with its own momentum. To stop it now would be like trying to stop blood from circulating. That night, I did. Something I hadn't done in years. I went to see Claire. Her house was in Westchester Modest. Pretty, the kind of place you'd expect from a woman who'd built her life on quiet stability. She opened the door herself, surprised but not speechless. Daniel. Her voice was flat, cautious. I was wondering when you'd show up. I just want to talk, I said. Of course you do. You always talk after it's too late. She led me into the kitchen. The smell of coffee and lemon cleaner hit me with a strange nostalgia. I'd forgotten how ordinary her world was, how small and safe it seemed compared to mine. You didn't have to do this, I said finally. The lawsuit, there were other ways. She laughed bitterly. Other ways? I tried letters, calls. I even went to one of your events in D.C., but your assistant told me you were too busy fighting for the voiceless. So, I decided to fight back. I'm not your enemy. Claire, her eyes flashed. You're everyone's enemy. Daniel, you've built an empire on resentment. You've made people afraid of their own children. Do you even know what that feels like? My kids are terrified to talk to me about money now because they think I'll sue them. You turned family into a transaction. I wanted to argue, to tell her she was wrong, but her voice cracked on the next word. You used Mom's name, her name, Daniel. For what? Revenge. I exhaled, shaking my head. No, to make the world see what we lost. She stared at me for a long moment, then said quietly, we didn't lose the world. We lost you. I left before I could say anything else. The trial that followed was chaos. Cameras everywhere, protesters on both sides some. Holding trolled her parents. Hotel shooting stopped the lawsuit. Machine. Claire stood before the court, calm and poised, while I sat behind my lawyers. Every word she spoke cutting deeper than any cross-examination could. My brother thinks he's saving people, she said during her testimony. But what he's really done is turn love into evidence and regret into a verdict. He's not protecting the elderly, he's prosecuting the living. Megan leaned toward me. She's good, she whispered. I didn't respond. I couldn't, because for the first time since the foundation began, I wasn't sure she was wrong. When it was my turn to testify, the courtroom went silent. The judge asked if I had any regrets about the foundation's actions. Regrets, I repeated. Et véridaille. But I'd rather live with regret than indifference. I've seen what neglect does. I've buried it. I've watched it rot good people from the inside. If my work makes even one child think twice before abandoning their parent, then it's worth the cost, even if the cost is your family. The judge asked. I looked at Claire. Her eyes glistened not with anger, but something closer to sorrow. Especially then, I said. The ruling took weeks. By the time it came, the air around the foundation had turned poisonous. Sponsors withdrew. Donors evaporated. Megan stopped coming to the office. Victor resigned without saying goodbye. The verdict finally arrived on a grey Tuesday morning. The court found in favor of the plaintiffs. Emotional harm established. Public defamation proven. Damages, $18.2 million. I remember the silence after the judge read the number. It was like the world inhaled and never exhaled. Claire didn't look at me as she left the courtroom. That night, the press called it the fall of the foundation. They said I'd been humiliated, broken, exposed. But what they didn't know was that even as the reporters swarmed the courthouse, I was already drafting a new plan. Something more deliberate. Because I only poli to deliver it. And if the courts could be corrupted by sentiment, then maybe justice needed a new vessel. On Tadindap headlines. That was the night the Evelyn Trust was born, and it wouldn't sue anyone. It would choose them. It began with silence, the kind that hums at the edge of obsession. After the verdict, my phone stopped ringing. No donors, no journalists, no family. The Evelyn Foundation was gutted by audits, frozen accounts, and staff resignations. My name had become synonymous with fanaticism, a man consumed by grief and vengeance. The headlines moved on, but I didn't, for weeks. I sat in the half-empty office on East 84th, surrounded by boxes of shredded files and dust that smelled faintly of printer ink and regret. The sign outside EF Legal Trust still hung crooked, but the paint had begun to peel. I remember tracing my mother's name with my finger on an old folder, the Evelyn Foundation, 2027 Q1 reports. It should have ended there. But justice doesn't die quietly. It changes form. The Evelyn Trust began not as a company, but as an idea written on a cocktail napkin at 2 in the morning. Justice without courts. Truth without mercy. I didn't want another legal organization tied down by bureaucracy. I wanted something incorruptible, something unseen. By the time the first checks cleared, the trust had no office, no board, no staff. Just encrypted servers, offshore accounts, and a single mission statement to restore balance between the neglected and the neglectful. The system was simple, almost mechanical. Every week, anonymous case files would arrive through an encrypted submission portal. Stories of abandonment, financial theft, emotional cruelty. Each file was reviewed by a small circle of analysts I'd quietly hired under NDAs so strict they might as well have been vows of silence. Their job wasn't to file lawsuits, it was to investigate, verify, quantify guilt. On se vérifier. The trust would act at first. It was subtle, frozen bank accounts. Anonymous leaks exposing hidden fraud. Tax investigations triggered at precisely the right moment. The neglectful children would watch their carefully curated lives unravel piece by piece, careers destroyed. Reputations blackened, influence stripped away. The old parents didn't need to sue anymore. They just had to wait. I didn't feel guilt at first. There was a strange serenity in watching the balance restored without the theater of a courtroom. It was clean, efficient, merciless. But then came the case that changed everything. Her name was Anita Singh, 72, widowed, living in San Jose. Her son, Raj, was a venture capitalist, polished and ambitious. He'd placed her in assisted living facility to earlier, pré-comptoise. Then he stopped answering her calls. When she asked for money to fix her dentures, elle s'en ira. Text, please stop guilt-tripping me. You're being dramatic. She reached out to us through an intermediary. The file was heartbreaking. Medical bills, screenshots, a photo of her sitting alone at a birthday table decorated by staff. I approved her case immediately. 2 months later, Roger's fund collapsed after a series of anonymous whistleblower reports surfaced. Online, fraud, misappropriation, insider trading. None of it was traceable back to us. Of course, the trust's fingerprints were erased before they could form. Anita's letter arrived 3 weeks after the scandal broke. Greater than. He came to see me yesterday, Daniel. For the first time in 2 years. He cried. He said he was sorry. I forgave him. I think maybe this was the only way he'd ever listen. Thank you. I sat there staring at her letter for hours. There was no anger, no gloating, only peace. It should have been a victory. But peace bought through destruction is a fragile currency. A month later, Rog was found dead in his apartment. Overdose. The police called it accidental. I called it inevitable. Megan found me the next morning, sitting in the office with the letter still in my hand. She looked older somehow, the kind of tired that doesn't sleep off. I know what you're doing, she said. I didn't look up. You'll have to be more specific. The trust, she said. I traced some of the transfers. Offshore. Accounts. Shell companies. Anonymous reports to the SEC. You think I wouldn't recognize your digital fingerprints? You were the one who taught me to cover my tracks, I said. Her voice softened. Dan, you're not fixing anything anymore. You're just punishing. I smiled faintly. And how is that different from justice? Justice ends, she said. Punishment doesn't. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The city noise outside felt like a distant pulse. Finally, I asked, do you think they deserve mercy? I think you do, she said. That night, she resigned. She didn't slam the door, didn't yell. She just left her badge on my desk and whispered, before this ends, it's going to take something from you that you can't get back. I didn't believe her then. Premier Dono. The trust kept growing, fueled by fear and admiration. Anonymous donors funded it, politicians whispered about it, and the media speculated endlessly about who was behind it. A vigilante network for the elderly, one article said. Digital retribution for forgotten parents, said another. And then one day, a new case file arrived. No sans dénomination made. A scanned letter, old and yellowed, the ink bleeding slightly at the edges. It was my mother's handwriting, greater than. Danny, sometimes love means letting go before. It ruins everything it touches. No signature, no context. Just that. I froze. The metadata, said the document, had been uploaded from an IP address in Westchester, Claire's home. For 2 days, I couldn't sleep. My mind kept circling the same thought. Was this a warning, a confession, or something worse, an invitation? When I finally called her, she answered after the first ring. You got it, she said. What is this? I demanded. Closure, she said. Mom wrote it years ago. I found it when I was packing up her things. I thought you should finally read it. You could have mailed it, I said. I could have, she replied. But you don't open letters, Daniel. You open wounds. Her voice trembled slightly, but she steadied it. Do you know what they're calling you now? I don't care. They call you the executor. I almost laughed. How dramatic. It's not a nickname, she said. It's a warning. And then she hung up. For the first time in years, I felt something close to fear. Not of being caught. That ship had sailed long ago, but of becoming exactly what she saw in me. A man who'd mistaken righteousness for purpose. That night, I opened my laptop, stared at the encrypted dashboard of the trust, hundreds of pending cases waiting for my approval, and hovered over the button that would erase it all. But I didn't press it. Because in the corner of the screen, a new message had appeared, timestamped to 14 a.m. Subject, urgent the children are organizing. And below that, a sign they're coming for you. I read the message 3 times before I realized my hands were shaking. The children are organizing. It sounded absurd at first, like some melodramatic threat scrawled by an online crank, but the sender's address was one I recognized. Victor Lane, my old partner. The man who'd walked away from the foundation without a backward glance. He hadn't used that address in years. The timestamp to 14 a.m. was exactly 7 minutes before I'd logged in. The trust servers were still running, but sluggish, like something was dragging through the code. I checked the metadata of his email. No IP trace, no location, no attached files, just one plain text message from a ghost. I tried calling him. The line rang once and cut off. Then my phone buzzed with an alert. Unauthorized access attempt detected. Someone was inside the system. For months, I'd believed the trust was invisible, no public record, no digital trail, but invisibility invites curiosity. And if the children of the parents we targeted had started talking to each other, pooling resources, maybe even hiring cyber investigators, then my invisible empire wasn't just exposed, it was hunted. By morning, the press had the story. Anonymous network targets wealthy families, the revenge of the elderly. The details were frighteningly accurate. They knew about the shell accounts, the false non-profits, even the offshore structure that routed the funds through Liechtenstein. What didn't he have or need had a villain? The headline read, Daniel Reed, the executor behind the Evelyn Trust. I don't remember the first call that came after the article hit, but I remember the noise, the sound of my phone vibrating non-stop until it fell off the desk. Lawyers, reporters, old allies, even the FBI's public affairs office. My voicemail filled with urgent, panicked voices. Binoonsete. We're calling it the parental purge. The internet devoured it. Hashtags, podcasts, conspiracy threads. People uploaded deepfake interviews of me confessing to orchestrating the destruction of families across America. A group of influencers started calling themselves the Forgotten Sons. They wore suits, smiled into cameras, and promised revenge. For the first time in years, I realized I had created exactly what I'd set out to destroy, an inheritance war that didn't end with lawyers, but with ideology. That night, I went to see Victor. His apartment in Brooklyn was stripped bare, no furniture, no electronics, just a smell of dust and bleach. On the table sat an old flip phone and a thumb drive. The note tape beside it said, "You were right. It's bigger than you think. Don't use Wi-Fi." I pocketed both and left. Back at my place, I booted up an offline laptop and opened the drive. A single folder blinked open. Project Covenant. Inside were hundreds of PDFs, private messages, meeting transcripts, photos, names I recognized. Namsideos, Techfunder lawyers, people. The foundation had once helped sue or expose. They'd built a network of their own. Their mission statement was chillingly familiar. To restore balance between the punished and the punisher. They'd stolen my words, my structure, my strategy. But their targets weren't exploitative children. They were the parents. They were hunting the elderly. Within a month, 5 of our former clients had accidents. A man in Chicago pushed down the stairs. A woman in Oregon whose brakes failed. Each one had filed a case through the foundation years earlier. Each one died alone. I tried warning Megan. She didn't answer my calls. Instead, she showed up at my apartment 2 days later hooded, pale, eyes red from exhaustion. They've been following me, she said. 2 men in a grey sedan. Every night. Samkar. I think they're connected to Covenant. I poured her coffee, but my hands were trembling too badly to set the cup down. Did you go to the police? She laughed bitterly. What would I say? My former boss started a secret organization to punish bad children, and now those children are killing their parents. They'd lock me up. We sat in silence for a long time. The city outside sounded muffled, as if the world had turned down its own volume. Then she looked at me and said, "You have to end it, Daniel. Burn it all. The trust, the backups, everything. Before they find you." I opened my laptop and stared at the encrypted dashboard D again. Hundreds of pending files blinked in the queue, some still waiting for verification, others approved and active. Each one represented a life about to change. They already found me, I said quietly. I just don't think they know what I've become yet. Her voice shook. You think you can fight them? I don't fight ghosts, I said. I make them. That was the night I rewrote the code. Première tournée. The trust inward. Every node, every account, every encrypted server was programmed to self-destruct after one final operation. But before deletion, it would execute a single protocol, Project Orpheus. The algorithm was simple. Identify every confirmed Covenant affiliate and make their secrets public. Every hidden asset, every offshore account, every bribe and betrayal. When I hit enter, I didn't know if it would work or if it would kill me before sunrise. It took 9 hours. By dawn, the internet exploded. Leaks flooded social media. Hundreds of names went viral. Reputations crumbled overnight. I watched in silence as the same fury that had once built my foundation now consumed my enemies. The machine had devoured its makers. When the sun rose over Manhattan, my screens went black. The servers erased themselves, leaving nothing but the faint hum of a dying hard drive. Megan was asleep on the couch, exhausted. I stepped onto the balcony, breathing in the first honest silence I'd felt in years. Then my phone buzzed. One new message. No sender. Greater than. You can't delete justice, Daniel. You just pass it on. Attached was a video. I pressed play. It was my mother. Sitting in her kitchen, flour on her hands, smiling faintly into the camera. Claire must have recorded it years ago. Greater than. You always had a fire in you, Danny, she said. But fire doesn't care what it burns, only that it burns. Promise me you'll remember what warmth feels like before it's all ash. The video ended with her laugh, soft, kind, almost enough to undo me. And then, behind the sound of her voice, something else played faintly. A whisper, a man's voice, greater than. He's still alive. I froze the frame, replayed the clip again. The voice wasn't hers. It was Victor's. He was alive, and he wasn't warning me. He was calling me. The first thing I noticed was the time stamp on the video, file exactly 48 hours before. Victor's the children are organizing message. That meant the video wasn't sent to warn me. It was bait. I replayed the clip again and again, isolating the background audio until the static began to reveal shapes, a hum that could have been a server or a generator, faint echoes that suggested concrete walls. Then, beneath Victor's voice, a faint rhythmic tapping, 3 short, 3 long, 3 short, SOS. He was alive, yes, but he was also trapped. Megan woke up on the couch, hair tangled, eyes heavy. You're still at it? She asked. He's reaching out, I said. Victor, he's in trouble. She rubbed her temples. Everyone's in trouble. Daniel. You, me, the parents who trusted us. What makes him special? He knows where the Covenant is operating from. Her brow furrowed. You think they have a headquarters? They're not a company. They're a contagion. Every contagion starts somewhere, I said. I spent the next 12 hours tracing Victor's last known financial activity, his travel records, even fragments of cell tower data from an old number. Most of it was static, digital dead ends, but one location pinged repeatedly, a rental storage facility in upstate New York. The name sent a chill through me. Maplewood Storage, my mother's town. It was too neat, too poetic, too cruel to be coincidence. Megan tried to stop me. "You're not going there," she said, blocking the door. "I have to." "No, you want to. You think if you find him, it fixes something. But you're walking into a trap built out of your own guilt. I've lived in guilt for 10 years, I said. If it's a trap, it's where I belong. I left before she could say another word. The drive north was quiet, the sky hanging low and bruised with rain. The highway, light stretched endlessly ahead, like a tunnel of ghosts. When I finally reached Maplewood, the town felt smaller than I remembered, emptier, as if time had been quietly consuming it in my absence. The storage facility was at the edge of town, behind a rusted gate and rows of corrugated metal units. The office was dark. I used the access code Victor once gave me for emergency case storage. It worked, unit to 3B. When I slid open the door, the smell of dust and oil hit me first. Inside were filing cabinets, boxes marked with old foundation codes, and, in the center, a single chair beneath a flickering light bulb. On the chair sat a tablet. It was already playing a video. Victor appeared on screen, thin, unshaven, eyes darting like a man who hadn't slept in days. "Danny," he began, voice trembling, "if you're watching this, you found me. Or rather, you found what's left. They've been tracking you for months. Covenants, not just children anymore. It's investors, politicians, families you've never even heard of. They're building something bigger than retribution." He coughed, wiped his mouth. "They call it the Heirloom Project. Their goal isn't revenge, it's replacement. They're taking your model and turning it into social policy. Accountability by bloodline, they say. They want every generation to be able to erase the last." He leaned closer to the camera. "You need to stop them, Danny. Not by code, not by law, by ending yourself. You're the seed. Everything grows from you. As long as you exist, the story keeps spreading." The video ended with static. I stood there, the cold air cutting through my coat, and then I heard it. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, echoing in the corridor outside. "Hello, Daniel." The voice was unmistakable. Calm, steady, threaded with the same moral superiority I'd once envied. "Claire." She stepped into the light, older now but unshaken, her expression unreadable. "You found him," she said softly. "Good. You're with them," I said. Her eyes flickered. "I'm protecting people. From you." "From what you started. I started justice. You started a plague," she said. "And now the only cure is containment." Behind her, two men appeared, suits, expressionless, the kind of silence that comes with authority. She motioned toward the tablet. "We wanted you to see it first, to understand before it ends. Ends," I repeated. "You think you are untouchable, but you're human. You have a pulse, a trail, a pattern. And once we erase that, the story stops spreading. You're going to kill me," I said. She didn't deny it. "Mom would be proud," I said, my voice breaking just enough to sound like sarcasm. Her jaw tightened. "Mom would have stopped you long before this." For a moment, everything was still, the rain tapping against the metal roof, the dim light flickering above us. Then I did what I'd spent my life perfecting. I improvised. I reached into my coat and triggered the kill switch app linked to the Trust's remaining server cluster. The failsafe wasn't meant for survival, it was meant for finality. A sharp beep echoed from the tablet. Claire glanced down just as the light bulb above us burst, plunging the unit into darkness. Then came the sound of distant thunder. No, not thunder. A low, mechanical rumble from beneath the floor. The storage units were wired into the Trust's last physical servers. And I just triggered a full data purge thermite destruction protocol. The air grew hot, fast. The walls began to glow faintly orange. Claire's voice rose over the roar. "What did you do?" "I'm ending the story," I shouted. No heirs, no replacements. The heat was unbearable. Metal warped and screamed around us. One of her men lunged forward, grabbing my arm, but I twisted free and shoved the tablet into his chest. Tell them, I said. Tell them, fire doesn't care what it burns. The last thing I saw before the ceiling collapsed was Claire's face lit in red, eyes wide not with fear, but recognition. Then everything went white. When I woke, I was in a hospital bed, bandages, machines humming. The nurse said I was found outside the facility, barely alive, no other survivors. The explosion had vaporized the servers, the files, the building. The Evelyn Trust was gone. So Claire. For weeks, I lay there in silence, drifting between dreams and morphine. The press called it an accident, a gas leak. The Covenant evaporated overnight, no arrests, no claims. Just ghosts, vanishing the way all good monsters do. On the 33rd day, a letter arrived. No return address, just a wax seal with an emblem. I recognized a stylized E inside was a single line written. In looping, handwriting that wasn't Claire's. Greater than the heirloom lives. And beneath it, a smaller note, typed in crisp font. Greater than a child never forgets the sins of their parent. Neither should you. The envelope smelled faintly of cinnamon and old paper. Just like her kitchen. And in that moment, I realized what Victor meant when he said I was the seed. They didn't need to kill me. They just needed me. To live long enough to become the story again. The letter sat on my lap like a coiled serpent, innocent in weight, but lethal in implication. I must have read it 50 times, tracing the wax seal with my thumb until the edges started to crumble. The heirloom lives. 4 words, simple and precise. But in their precision was something almost elegant, like a threat written by someone who didn't need to shout to be heard. It had been months since the explosion, months since I'd walked out of Maplewood alive, when I shouldn't have. My burns were most healed, the scars of I'd's lucky première new bête. Luck is what cowards call consequences that missed. They kept me under observation for 6 weeks. Psych evaluation, physical therapy, guarded recovery. I told them nothing about the foundation, about the trust, about the covenant. To the doctors, I was a quiet, broken old man who'd survived an accident. To the world, I was gone, dead, which suited me fine. But that letter, it shattered the illusion of rest. Whoever sent it knew I was alive, knew where I was, and knew what name to whisper to stir the embers. Heirloom. I spent the next days pretending to heal, and the nights tracing the letter's origin. The wax was custom hand-pressed. A faint scent of rose and sandalwood. Expensive, European. The handwriting ink feathered from a steel nib. The kind used by calligraphers or collectors. No smudges, no fingerprints. Whoever sent it had experience making things disappear. 2 weeks later, when the hospital cleared me to leave, I didn't go home. My penthouse was gone, seized in the investigation after the explosion. I rented a small apartment above a laundromat in Queens, the kind of place where anonymity came free with the mildew. Every night, I kept the letter on the table, beside the bed, as if daring it to speak again. It didn't, but other things started to happen. First, a news story, an anonymous benefactor had purchased the remaining debts of several elderly plaintiffs from old foundation cases, clearing them completely. A coincidence, they said. Then came a report from a small town in Maine. Nursing home, fully renovated overnight, every resident's medical bills erased by a trust no one could trace. The name at the bottom of the wire, transfer forms, stopped me cold. The Heirloom Initiative. I remember whispering to the empty room, you learned well. Whoever they weren't just copying the trust, they were refining it, making it palatable, civilized, turning my moral virus into philanthropy. I almost admired it, almost. Then came the message. It wasn't an email or a call. It was a voice familiar, calm, bleeding through my old landline one night around 2 a.m. Hello, Daniel. I froze. The line crackled, faintly, the hum of distance thick between us. Who is this? You know who I am. I closed my eyes. You're dead. So were you. Claire's voice was softer now, colder. The fire didn't take me, Daniel. It just burned away, what was left of who I used to be. You tried to end it, but fire spreads, remember. You didn't destroy the story. You passed it on. My throat tightened. You're running it. I'm guiding it, she said. The heirloom isn't about punishment anymore. It's about order. A world where the next generation answers for the last and the last for the next. No more lawsuits, no more balance. They say Sid. That's inheritance by blood feud. She chuckled softly. You called it justice when you did it. That was different. No, she said. It was inevitable. The silence stretched. I could hear something behind her voices, muted machinery, the echo of a large space. You could help us, she said finally. You built the blueprint. We just perfected it. We could use your mind. Daniel. We could make this eternal. You want my blessing, I said. You want to canonize your heresy. I want peace, she said. And if it takes fear to keep the world decent, then fear will do. Something inside me cracked. You sound like father, I said quietly. For the first time, her voice faltered. Maybe he was right about some things. Like what? That guilt is the only thing that keeps us human. Then the line went dead. I sat there, in the dark, the dial tone buzzing like a heartbeat. For a long time, I couldn't move. Could not think. Only one thought looped in my mind. I hadn't stopped anything. I'd just given it a name. The next morning, I left the apartment for the first time in weeks. I went back to Maplewood. The town was colder now, quieter, as if the soil itself remembered the fire. The storage site was still sealed off, but a new building had risen beside it, a sleek, glass-walled facility with a polished sign that caught the morning sun. The Heirloom Foundation, for legacies that last. My breath caught. Inside, I could see people in suits moving through hallways lined with framed photographs, families smiling. Elderly parents shaking hands with younger adults, news clippings about ethical inheritance and intergenerational equity. It was everything I'd dreamed of. Repainted to look holy. I walked through the lobby, unnoticed, until I reached a digital kiosk displaying their mission statement. We believe justice should be hereditary. A moral lineage that ensures accountability never dies. And at the bottom, a signature. Claire Reed, Director. I felt something shift in me, then something colder than grief, heavier than rage. I realized Claire hadn't inherited my curse. She'd evolved it. She'd taken my fire and built a cathedral around it. That night, I returned to my apartment, turned on the single lamp, and opened my old notebook, the one where it had all started. Inside were names, ideas, diagrams of systems that punished, corrected, restored. I tore out every page, one by one, until only the last remained, greater than. If justice becomes eternal, mercy becomes extinct. I closed the book, set it beside the letter, and picked up the phone. There was only one person left who could still help me. Megan answered on the first ring. Her voice was older now, hoarse, wary. I was wondering when you'd call. I found her, I said. She's alive. I know, she said. I've been watching. Then you know what she's done. Yes, and I know what you're about to do. I hesitated. Can I count on you? Je suis guide. You can count on me to make sure you don't make it worse. Then I guess we're both liars, I said. Because by the time she reached my apartment, the plan would already be in motion. The heirloom wanted to make morality hereditary. I intended to make memory contagious. This time, I wouldn't build a foundation. I'd build a virus, and I'd name it after my mother. The virus began as an echo, a whisper in the code. It was the only thing I knew how to make anymore. There's a strange comfort in creation when you know it will destroy you to an intimacy in crafting your own ending. I called it Evelyn. Not because it was beautiful, but because it was inevitable. It didn't live on servers. It lived in stories. That was the brilliance of it, the curse of it. Evelyn was a mimetic chain, an algorithm wrapped in language, designed to hide inside narrative structures, replicate through communication. Every time someone told the story of the Evelyn Foundation, or the Heirloom Initiative, or the madman who tried to save the old by punishing the young, they'd carry a piece of the code with them. It would crawl into systems, leak into speech recognition, software, embed itself in articles, podcasts, chat logs, recorded testimony. Each time the tale was retold, it would spread, a contagion of confession. And every system that carried it, banking databases, social media feeds. Government archives would begin to reorganize information the same way my mind had once tried to, by guilt, Who owed who? Who neglected who? Who abandoned who? It wouldn't punish. It wouldn't forgive. It would simply remember. But even memory becomes a weapon when it's shared without consent. Megan arrived 3 nights later, as I knew she would. She didn't knock, she just opened the door and stood there. Drenched from the rain, a pistol in her hand and heartbreak in her eyes. I told you not to make it worse, she said. I'm not. I answered. I'm finishing it. She looked around the room, the laptop humming on the desk, the walls covered in handwritten notes and equations. You built something. Premier c'est sauf. Somonja Jésus. Daniel, she hold mouth close. What it listens, as I said. It remembers. It spreads the truth the way stories always have, silently, without permission. Every time someone mentions the heirloom, they'll awaken it. Her face paled. You turn grief into a plague. I smiled faintly. I turned silence into consequence. She shook her head. This isn't justice anymore. It's infection. You're about to poison the entire world just to prove you were right. I turned the laptop toward her. Lines of code glimmered, on the screen organic. Recursive, evolving, not to prove, to preserve. Because they'll erase everything else. They'll scrub the foundation from history, paint the heirloom as salvation. But this will outlive them. She stepped closer, voice trembling. And what if it outlives everything? I didn't answer. Because I'd already asked myself that question 100 times. And every time, I came to the same conclusion. It had to. Megan's hand hovered over the laptop, uncertain. If I shut it down now, you can't, I said. It's already gone. Her eyes widened. Where? Everywhere. I'd released Evelyn 2 hours earlier. It had slipped into an encrypted newsfeed API, disguised as metadata. From there, it would ride the stories, every weblog, every repost, every angry opinion about me, or the foundation, or the heirloom. It would hide behind words like justice and family and legacy, because those were the words people never questioned. It'll rewrite the truth. Daniel, she said, backing away. You'll kill the idea of truth itself. I looked at her, and for the first time in years, I felt something close to calm. Truth was never meant to live forever. Only guilt was. She raised the gun again, her hand shaking. Then, maybe it ends with you. I didn't move. If you kill me, the story becomes legend. If you let me live, it becomes a warning. Either way, it spreads. Why do you always talk like you're God? She whispered. Because someone has to sound like him when he stops answering. The silence after that was the kind that bends time. The kind where a single heartbeat feels like an entire lifetime begging to matter. Then the gun clicked, empty. She lowered it slowly. You always were 2 steps ahead, weren't you? No, I said quietly. Just 1 step closer to the edge. She sank into a chair, defeated, staring at the rain streaking the window. So what happens now? Now, I said, the world starts keeping score, and it did. In the weeks that followed, strange anomalies appeared across the digital landscape. Bank records cross-referenced with forgotten wills. Family court databases began auto-linking neglect reports to inheritance filings. Politicians' old statements about elder care re-emerged, tagged with the names of their own estranged parents. The press called it the memory plague. Conspiracy forums said it was divine judgment. And through it all, the heirloom tried to adapt. Claire's pristine machine began to falter as Evelyn's code wove into its architecture, twisting it from inside out. One morning, their website displayed a single phrase before vanishing from the internet completely. Greater than justice is not hereditary. I watched it happen from the shadows. Unseen, unwanted, Megan disappeared after that night, I think. She couldn't bear to watch the aftermath. Maybe she found peace somewhere. Maybe she m'en passait. The world adjusted, as it always does, pretending it understood what had changed. Laws shifted. Relationships broke. People began apologizing for things they hadn't done yet, afraid of what their children might remember. Later, and sometimes in the quiet hours before dawn, I'd imagine my mother sitting in her kitchen again, hands dusted with flour, smiling at her son, who finally learned too late what forgiveness really costs. Then, one morning, I received another letter. No, wax seal this time. No return address. Just plain paper. For definitely written in but straighter than asterisk. You were right. Daniel. Fire. doesn't care what it burns. But sometimes, if you're lucky, it leaves behind light. Asterisk greater than. See, I sat for a long time, staring at that single, initial. Then I went to the window and watched the city below, billboards flashing, people rushing, voices echoing across glass and steel. They were all telling stories. And somewhere, inside every word, my mother's name was still whispering. Evelyn was alive. And so was I, but the difference was this time, the world was finally listening. There was no sound the morning it ended, only the stillness that comes when the world forgets to breathe. Disbarred, almost sereine. But I knew what was coming. Evelyn's voice had grown too loud to hide. In the weeks after the heirloom vanished, the contagion reached its zenith. It no longer needed servers or systems to survive. It lived in people. You could see it in the eyes of strangers on subways, in the hesitant way children spoke to their parents, in the tremor of guilt that passed between generations. Everyone remembered everything now, every wound, every neglect, every silent cruelty. And though it began as vengeance, it had become something else, something that frightened even me. The world had turned itself into a mirror. Every screen flickered the same phrase that had ended the heirloom. Justice is not hereditary. But underneath, Evelyn had begun to write her own message. Lino F. text appearing at billboard. Phones greater than mercy's not extinction. Et toi, Et adoba? Somewhere, inside the chaos, the code had learned compassion. I'd given birth to a ghost, and she had learned to forgive. That night, I walked through Central Park for the first time in years. The city was quiet, its usual noise replaced by whispers, soft apologies, people calling their parents, tears on park benches. It was imperfect, human, fragile. And, for the first time, it wasn't fear. Driving it, it was understanding. At the lake, I stopped where my mother used to sit feeding the ducks when I was a boy. The moon hung low, the water still. I opened the last letter from Claire again, her handwriting delicate but sure. Greater than you were right, Daniel. Fire doesn't care what it burns. But sometimes, if you're lucky, it leaves behind light. I folded it once, set it on the bench, and smiled. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was standing at the end of something. I was standing at the edge of renewal. The phone in my pocket buzzed. One final message blinked across the cracked screen. Greater than. Goodbye, Danny. We're proud of you. No signature, no number. Just her voice, transcribed by a machine that now spoke like my mother. I laughed quiet, shaking, honest, and let the phone slip from my hand into the lake. The ripples swallowed it whole, the light fading into the dark. Somewhere across the skyline, Evelyn was still whispering her stories. They weren't about revenge anymore. Te were à bout? Memory and love and the fragile grace that comes when the world remembers what it once forgot. As I turned to leave, dawn broke over the city. The sunlight struck the windows of the towers like fire, but softer this time, warm, golden, alive. For the first time in my life, I understood what she'd meant. Fire doesn't care what it burns. But light remembers. And in that remembering, everything finally began again. Doesn't care what it burns. But sometimes, if you're lucky, it leaves behind light. See, I sat for a long time, staring at that single, initial. Then I went to the window and watched the city below, billboards flashing, people rushing, voices echoing across glass and steel. Tewere. All telling stories. And somewhere, inside every word, my mother's name was still whispering, Evelyn was alive. And so was I, but the difference was this time, the world was finally listening. There was no sound the morning it ended, only the stillness that comes when the world forgets to breathe. The city blew, almost sereine, but in knew. Evelyn's voice had grown. Too loud to hide. In the weeks after the heirloom vanished, the contagion reached its zenith. It no longer needed servers or systems to survive. It lived in people. You could see it in the eyes of strangers on subways, in the hesitant way children spoke to their parents. In the tremor of guilt that passed between generations, everyone remembered everything now. Everyone there, every neglect, every silent cruelty. And though it began as vengeance, it had become something else, something that frightened even me. The world had turned itself into a mirror. Every screen flickered the same phrase that had ended the heirloom. Justice is not hereditary. But underneath, Evelyn had begun to write her own message. Lean decks to Pyrilic Bjolborgville watches. Mercy is not extinction. It was her. It had to be. Somewhere, inside the chaos, the code had learned compassion. I'd given birth to a ghost, and she had learned to forgive. That night, I walked through Central Park for the first time in years. The city was quiet, its usual, noise replaced by whisper-soft apologies, people calling their parents, tears on park benches. It was imperfect, human, fragile. And for the first time, it wasn't fear driving it. It was understanding. At the lake, I stopped where my mother used to sit feeding the ducks when I was a boy. The moon hung low, the water still. I opened the last letter from Claire again, her handwriting delicate but sure. You were right, Daniel. Fire doesn't care what it burns. But sometimes, if you're lucky, it leaves behind light. Première folle d'Edith. Once, set it on the bench and smiled. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was standing at the end of something. I was standing at the edge of renewal. The phone in my pocket buzzed. One final message blinked across the cracked screen. Goodbye, Danny. We're proud of you. No signature, no number. Just her voice, transcribed by a machine that now spoke like my mother. I laughed quiet, shaking. Honest and let the phone slip from my hand into the lake. The ripples swallowed it whole, the light fading into the dark. Somewhere across the skyline, Evelyn was still whispering her stories. They weren't about revenge anymore. They were about memory and love, and the fragile grace that comes when the world remembers what it once forgot. As I turned to leave, dawn broke over the city. The sunlight struck the windows of the towers like fire, but softer this time, warm, golden, alive. For the first time in my life, I understood what she'd meant. Fire doesn't care what it burns, but light remembers. And in that remembering, everything finally began again.